The December air in Newark, New Jersey, carried the familiar bite that Shaquille O'Neal remembered from his childhood. The towering basketball legend walked slowly down South 13th Street, his massive frame casting long shadows under the flickering streetlights. No entourage, no cameras, no fanfare, just Shaq, alone with his memories. He paused in front of a weathered apartment building, its brick facade marked by decades of urban wear. This was where he'd spent countless afternoons after school, running up and down these same sidewalks with a basketball that was more tape than leather. The makeshift hoop they'd nailed to Mrs. Rodriguez's fence was long gone, but the memories remained vivid. "Man, we used to own these streets," he whispered to himself, a slight smile crossing his face as he remembered the endless games of one-on-one that would stretch until their mothers called them home for dinner. The neighborhood had changed. Some buildings stood renovated with fresh paint and modern fixtures, while others bore the scars of economic hardship. Boarded windows stared back at him like hollow eyes, and graffiti told stories of struggles he'd been fortunate enough to escape. As Shaq continued his nostalgic walk, the winter wind picked up, carrying with it the sounds of the city. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, and the muffled conversations of people heading home from late shifts. He pulled his jacket tighter, though the cold barely registered against his imposing frame. Turning the corner onto Avon Avenue, he found himself standing before the elementary school where it all began. The basketball court was still there, though the nets were torn and the backboards showed their age. This was sacred ground, the place where a young Shaquille first dreamed of playing in the NBA. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's appearances, but he ignored them. Tonight wasn't about business or fame. It was about remembering where he came from, about honoring the boy who used to shoot baskets here until his hands were raw and his dreams felt as big as the sky above. The temperature was dropping, and most sensible people had already retreated indoors. But something compelled Shaq to keep walking, as if these streets were calling him back for a reason he couldn't yet understand. The cold was becoming bitter now, and even Shaq's thick jacket couldn't keep out the chill that seemed to seep into his bones. As he turned down a side street lined with closed storefronts and dim streetlights, something caught his eye that made his heart skip a beat. Huddled against the wall of an old laundromat, partially hidden in the shadows between two dumpsters, was a figure wrapped in what looked like a thin, tattered blanket. The person was curled up tight against the cold, trying to find shelter from the wind that whipped around the corner. Shaq's first instinct was the same as most people's: to keep walking, to mind his own business. But something about the way the figure lay there, something about the shape of the shoulders beneath that worn blanket, made him stop. He moved closer, his massive shoes crunching softly on the broken glass and debris that littered the sidewalk. The figure stirred slightly but didn't wake. In the pale glow of the streetlight, Shaq could make out a face that was weathered and gaunt, marked by years of hardship that had carved deep lines around the eyes and mouth. But those eyes, even closed in exhausted sleep, were unmistakable. The shape of the nose, the way the hair curled at the temples despite being unkempt and dirty. This was a face he knew better than his own reflection. "No way," Shaq breathed, his voice barely a whisper in the cold night air. "Marcus." It was Marcus Johnson, his best friend from childhood, the kid who could drain three-pointers like they were layups, the one who'd always had his back when the older kids tried to push them around, the friend who'd dreamed alongside him of making it out of these streets and into something bigger. Shaq's hands trembled as he knelt down beside his old friend. The successful businessman, the NBA legend, the man who'd conquered the world, all of that fell away in this moment. He was just a kid from Newark again, looking at his best friend who'd somehow gotten lost along the way. The contrast was heartbreaking. While Shaq had gone on to achieve every dream they'd ever shared, Marcus had clearly fought battles that he'd lost. The expensive watch on Shaq's wrist felt heavy suddenly, and the warmth of his designer jacket seemed almost insulting in the face of his friend's suffering. He reached out tentatively, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. The man was thinner than he remembered, and through the blanket, Shaq could feel how the cold had seeped into his friend's bones. Marcus, Shaq said softly, giving his friend's shoulder a gentle shake. Marcus, wake up, man. The figure stirred, then suddenly jerked awake with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned to sleep with one eye open on the streets. Marcus's eyes darted around wildly before focusing on the massive figure kneeling beside him. For a moment there was only confusion in those familiar brown eyes. Then recognition dawned slowly, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Shaq? Marcus's voice was hoarse and barely above a whisper. He blinked several times, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Shaquille O'Neal? Man, I must be dreaming. It's me, Marcus. It's really me. Shaq's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around his childhood friend, pulling him into an embrace that seemed to bridge the decades and the different paths their lives had taken. Marcus was stiff at first, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the moment, but then his body relaxed, and he hugged back with the desperation of a man who hadn't felt genuine human connection in longer than he could remember. They held each other in silence for what felt like an eternity, two friends reconnecting across a chasm of time and circumstance. Shaq could feel Marcus trembling, whether from cold, emotion, or something else entirely, and it broke his heart all over again. I can't believe it's you, Marcus finally whispered against Shaq's shoulder. I've seen you on TV so many times, man. So proud of everything you've done. Never thought, he pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Never thought you'd see me like this. Tell me what happened, Shaq said, settling himself on the cold concrete beside his friend. He didn't care about his expensive clothes or what anyone might think. Right now, nothing mattered except this moment with Marcus. The story that poured out was one of heartbreak and struggle that had become all too common in their old neighborhood. Marcus had gotten a scholarship to play basketball at a smaller college, but a knee injury in his sophomore year had ended those dreams. Without basketball, he'd lost his way. First came depression, then alcohol, then harder substances that promised to numb the pain of watching his future slip away. Lost my mom to cancer 5 years ago, Marcus continued, his voice barely steady. That's when I really hit bottom. Couldn't keep a job, lost the apartment, been on the streets for 2 years now. He looked up at his old friend with eyes that held equal parts shame and hope. But seeing you here, man, it's like maybe there's still something left to fight for. What happened next wasn't planned or calculated for social media impact. It was simply one human being responding to another's need with pure, unconditional love. Shaq stood up and, without a word, took off his expensive winter jacket and wrapped it around Marcus's shoulders. Then he pulled out his phone, not to take a selfie or record a video, but to make calls that would change his friend's life. I'm getting you off these streets tonight, Shaq said firmly, and we're going to figure out the rest together. While Marcus sat stunned by the warm jacket and the promise of hope, Shaq made call after call, first to a luxury hotel downtown to book a suite, then to his personal physician to arrange immediate medical care, then to a rehabilitation center he'd quietly supported for years, speaking in hushed tones about getting his friend the help he needed. Unknown to either of them, Maria Santos, a nursing student, walking home from her late shift at the hospital, had witnessed the entire encounter from across the street. Moved by what she'd seen, she had pulled out her phone and recorded the last few minutes, Shaq giving Marcus his jacket, making calls on his behalf, and finally helping his friend to his feet with infinite gentleness and dignity. Come on, brother, Shaq said, wrapping his arm around Marcus to steady him. Let's go get you warm and fed. We've got a lot of catching up to do. As they walked slowly down the street together, the NBA legend and the homeless man who'd once been his closest friend, Maria posted the video on TikTok with a simple caption. This is what real friendship looks like. No cameras, no publicity stunt, just love. By morning, the video had been viewed millions of times. But for Shaq and Marcus, huddled together in a hotel room sharing stories and planning for the future, the viral moment was just the beginning of something much more important. The restoration of a friendship and the second chance that everyone deserves. 6 months later, Marcus would stand beside Shaq at the opening of a new community center in Newark, clean and sober, working as a youth counselor helping other kids avoid the pitfalls that had nearly claimed his life. The viral video had brought attention to the homeless crisis, but more importantly, it had brought two friends back together and shown the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply see someone's humanity and respond with your own. The streets of Newark remembered many things, but they would never forget the night when fame bowed to friendship, and success was measured not in dollars or accolades, but in the simple act of one person refusing to walk past another's pain.